Welcome back to the Training Model Podcast. Today we will be discussing rib cage, rectus abdominis, obliques, the difference between shifting back and flexion. And all of these ideas have come from a question that was in my inbox from Matt Cahill, who is actually part of the next intake of the Movement Mentorship, which kicks off on Friday. So if you are keen on diving deep on these anatomy, movement, coaching, biomechanics, and some programming conversations around training, becoming a better coach, getting better outcomes, getting more efficient with your programming, I would highly recommend jumping in the Movement Mentorship. It is the first link down below. It closes on Friday. So if you listen to this on the day, it closes tomorrow. If you're late, it's closed. You'll have to wait until the next intake, which I've had a few questions on, and I think I'm going to open it straight away. It will be probably 50% more expensive. I'm thinking of, in fact, I'm going up to 1,500 Aussie dollars for the next intake. Part of that is going to be expanding the content by 2 weeks to more programming stuff. Slightly a different structure overall, but for the most part, same content, same ideas, same principles, just presented in a slightly different way, I guess, and allowing a couple of weeks for exploring programming, which generally gets explored anyway, especially in the Q&As. But I think I'm adding 2 weeks to specifically discuss those things and get those ideas out there in a structured way rather than just naturally popping up through the Q&A. So if you jump in this intake, you're not missing out on any ideas. And there's always the Q&As. I'm fucking losing my train of thought now anyway. But anyway, it closes on Friday, this intake. I was a bit nervous. I was umming and ahhing whether to even run that intake at the start of the year, just because of the end of last year and everything that was happening. But I was like, no, if I stay consistent with my content, I know I can make this a viable intake, and it's definitely got to that point, which is fantastic. We have 19 coaches ready to dive in to the live calls next week, but it's not too late if you are keen. Final link first link down below. The other part to that is I'm coming to Sydney on March the 28th for a workshop. 1 day movement model, movement principles, strength, muscle, mobility is kind of the tagline for it. But if you're keen to do some in-person stuff, I think there's 5 early bird tickets left at $440 for the day. So that will be second link down below. But Matt asked the question that we are going to discuss today, and that is going to be, well, his question centered around the difference between shifting center of mass back versus simply flexing the trunk and flexing the system, because they are two separate things. So obviously I've chatted a lot about center of mass. It is the main principle, especially once you learn the reactive nature of the nervous system and then layer that into the reactive nature of muscle tension. Center of mass is the thing that the system is reacting to. It's balance more than it is anything else. So obviously I chat about center of mass a lot in my content and a lot on these podcasts. And it's a big principle in all of my actual education, my courses and mentorships and those sort of things. But once you learn center of mass, you start to see the intricacies in different skeleton positions and subtle changes in the skeleton position, how they have sort of like ripple effects to the reactive tension in surrounding joints and surrounding sort of movement expressions. And a big one is understanding that a shift back is different to flexion of the spine. Obviously, as we shift our center of mass back in space, eventually it will turn into a spinal flexion, eventually. However, that is not where we want to take it. Like it's too far. You're doing the right things, but you've just gone too far, or the reactive muscular tension to achieve that task is actually not what we're looking for. And that becomes the conversation around rectus abdominis and obliques. But before we even get into that, we actually need to understand how the rib cage moves, the axial skeleton, or a big chunk of the axial skeleton being the rib cage on the spine, because there's 2 main sort of movements, 2 actions of the rib cage. The first one is called your pump handle. So if you think about your sternum and your breastbone, if you think about somebody grabbing the sternum, like literally like going into your rib cage and grabbing the sternum. The movement of the sternum is forward in space and up. And that is called the pump handle action. It's forward and up. It's anterior motion of the front of our rib cage. So when we inhale, when we expand the rib cage, the sternum should move forward and up in space. When we compress and exhale and close down that space, the pump handle will then pull down in space. So the sternum will move towards the spine. That is one of the key actions of the rib cage. The other one is called your bucket handle action. And this is the lateralization of your ribs. So when we inhale, the lower ribs is where the easiest point to see it is. However, the action is happening at all levels of the rib cage. It's just really easy to see at the lower ribs. The lower ribs will actually lateralize and lift up and out. And if you think about grabbing a bucket handle on a bucket, as that bucket handle swings out to the side, that lateralization and lifting of the bucket handle is what's happening at the rib cage. That would be what happens when we expand the rib cage. When we compress the rib cage, it closes down that lateral aspect. You may have heard the idea of like circumferential breathing. This comes a lot within bracing strategies for strength training and powerlifting, where we want to be able to expand our trunk in all directions. It's not just forward expansion, it's lateral expansion as well. And then that's what you brace down on. That 360-degree breath is another tagline for it. Circumferential breathing is another tagline for it. Both of those ideas are simply just an understanding that when we expand the trunk, there is motion in all directions happening. And that's where those ideas around bracing come in. How does this axial skeleton motion, this relative motion of the rib cage, then tie back to this center of mass strategy, this sagittal plane center of mass strategy, forward and back center of mass strategy? Ultimately, we're talking about two different subgroups of muscles that are controlling these motions more than anything else. So if we think about the pump handle, so the sternum motion, it is going to be heavily controlled by things that pull directly down in space. And that is going to be your rectus abdominis. Because the sternum is moving forward and up, the muscles that pull down and back in is what is going to control that sternum position. So that is going to be your rectus abdominis. It's going to lengthen when the pump handle comes up, when the sternum lifts. And then as the tension comes into the rectus abdominis, it's going to pull down on the sternum. And that is what is actually going to create that crunching feeling that you get when you do your standard crunch-based core training. Think of like a crunch. You could think of like a gar hammer raise. You could think of anything that's like sagittal plane dominant core training is going to come from that feeling of the rectus abdominis lifting and extending the spine and lifting the sternum, and then compressing down and pulling that sternum down. If, as you sit there, you think about this rib cage motion dominant through the sternum, what you'll probably start to feel is that as you crunch down, you actually end up losing height. Your head pulls down, you start to round your upper back a little bit, and all of that can be seen and actually is a flexion of the trunk, which isn't a bad thing. That's what it is. It's just different to what happens when we pin the rib cage with obliques. If you then think about your bucket handle action, so that lateral rib cage position and motion, and actually think about trying to exhale and close, what you'll notice is that the rib cage will compress, the bucket handle will come down, you will exhale the air, but you don't lose height. All you've actually done is I've got a rib cage here. For people that are watching this podcast, all we're doing here is compressing the rib cage. We're not actually pulling the sternum down and flexing the trunk. We are simply just compressing the rib cage. It's actually happening in all directions, but it's just dominant through the oblique strategy and pinning the rib cage down in space. They are two separate strategies to get air out. The task at the nervous system level is to exhale your air, to compress your rib cage, to exhale your air. The reactive tension that comes from the muscular system can be either of those motions dominant. One is flexion dominant, rectus dominant, pump handle dominant. The other one is oblique dominant, bucket handle dominant. They have two different outcomes to skeleton shape though. Obviously, if we were to shift our center of mass back and pass just the shift back strategy and get all the way to the flexion strategy, we are going to see both of those strategies start to present. We're going to start to feel obliques, we're going to start to feel rectus, and we're going to start to see closure laterally, but also pulling down and flexing of the trunk. That's what happens when we shift back so far that flexion comes into the system. And more often than not, that is actually what we're trying to avoid. We are trying to avoid the aggressive flexion strategy when we produce these shifted back options in training. If at any point you or your clients are losing height, so they're actually dropping down in space when they do things like reaches. It's very common on a landmine press. People will do the landmine press, and then in order to get that last little reach, they'll kind of drop their trunk down. It's very common in planking and push-up with reach strategies. They'll get to the top of the position, and then all of a sudden their head and everything, they look like a turtle. They kind of just get sucked in space, like they get pulled down in space. If at any point you're starting to lose height through those shifted back strategies, we're actually just using a rectus dominant strategy. We're pinning the sternum down and we're flexing the trunk, which is what we want to avoid. What would be a much better, much more sort of productive strategy to learn this shifted back strategy is actually trying to find and use oblique tension and not losing height. If you can just set up all of those same movements and just tell your client, hey, can you notice that when you went to the top position there, your head pulled in and everything? I want you to stop when that starts. So you do your push up with reach, and as soon as everything starts to flex down, that's their stop point. You still get the reach there, you still get the shift back, you should still get a lot of abs, but we don't get that huge flexion dominance. That's what we're looking for when we're asking clients to simply shift back. They should not lose height. I had another question on one of the posts I made this week that ties into this idea, which is, well, how do you remove the ab strategy, the rectus strategy? And if we go back and bias more of this oblique strategy, if we go back to the actions of the rib cage and we think of the sternum dominant motion being rectus dominant and the bucket handle lateralization dominant motion being more oblique biased, that is how we begin to create the sensory feeling of the oblique tension. So we actually want to try to find positions, try to find strategies that train more of the bucket handle down strategy. And the easiest thing with that is don't lose height, as we've already touched on. But the second part to that is using the exhale. So if in any of your core drills, and these are probably more, especially at the sensory end of the sensory motor continuum, they're going to be more static, absolutely. They will really only be used as learning tools. So you might use them for a couple of weeks just to build the sensory awareness up in your clients. Once they've got the sensory awareness, we need to get away from the static drills and get towards more loaded stuff and start to apply it into more positional stuff within training that's actually productive at the motor end of the continuum. But if we're looking for the obliques and we can bias our static drills to the exhale without losing height, that is where the sensory behaviors of the obliques will start to really ride up. My favorite one for that is just simply a plank with reach. So you set yourself up in a plank position, you reach your elbows down into the ground and drive your rib cage backwards in space. You stop the reach at the point where the head starts to pull down and all of that. Some people can get a really good reach in on that. I like to cue like armpits through the floor. You can also increase it a little bit better with biasing some distal supination. So ERing the hands a little bit, maybe even like supinating the wrists off the ground. All of that ER distal drive will help the protraction motion of serratus come in and pull the rib cage back, rather than like an elevating of the scaps and shortening of the neck. Supination, external rotation is going to bias that good serratus driven protraction through the trunk. So you can set up in that position a little bit, drive the rib cage back, and then do complete exhales as your reps. So nice strong air in. You should feel your upper back and the sides of your trunk expanding with that exhale. and then a big open mouth sigh, 100% of your air. The cue I like to use with clients is poison gas. You've got poison gas inside you, get it all out. Otherwise, you're going to die. An open mouth sigh, when they think they've got enough out, push for another couple seconds on that exhale. Hold that position. And if you hold that position, it might take a couple of reps to really get that full transition of gas out of the trunk and really start to get that shape change at the rib cage. But if you can get your clients to feel that exhale position without losing height, with a good protraction, with a good shift back of the rib cage, that is going to become a huge bias towards the obliques and the closing, the lateralization of the rib cage. Once they've got that feeling, find a drill, standing, moving. Anterior loaded squats are really easy. Split squats are really easy. Hinges are really easy. Some machines can be really helpful as well. Find an exercise in standing where they can go and find that same feeling. Drive the elbows forward in space, feel that exhale, and find that oblique tension, and then start training motion around that ab tension, that oblique tension, sorry. Keep that oblique tension as they're training around those positions. And then we just transition to the motor end of training, which is once they've got the sensory feeling, it probably will only take a couple of sets for them to really get it. Once they've got the feeling, we bleed that into as much training as we need to for them to develop the skill. We need to get away from the static positions. We need to get away from the floor, the ground-based, the low level, the sensory drills as quickly as possible. That sensory end of the continuum, that static, ground-based, high proprioception, isolated movements, heavy cueing, internal focus, that sensory end is only used as much as it's needed. Once the client adopts and understands what we're feeling and what we're trying to pick up from a sensory feeling, we need to bleed it to the motor end as quickly and as fast as possible and get it into training and get them using it in a productive environment for their training. So that is the difference between the shift back, oblique tension, closure of the rib cage, not losing height, and flexing. Flexing is simply just pulling the sternum down, crunching the trunk, rounding the back, and losing height. That is the biggest difference. So hopefully that helps for some of these ideas. Thank you, Matt, for engaging with the content, jumping in the mentorship, and then asking really good questions. We discussed the rib cage heavily in week 3 of the mentorship. Week 1, we do some scapular sort of pre-work and understanding scap position, arm position, different loading strategies, the motion of the scap, movement around the rib cage. But then in week 3, we tie it back to the axial skeleton, which is heavily sort of focused around rib cage, expansion, compression, changing position, changing tension, and actually getting some really big outcomes for performance. So if you're interested in the movement mentorship, can't recommend it enough. It will never be this price again. It's under $1,000 right now. It's going up in price. It closes on Friday. Now's the time to get in before we set sail on the next phase of training models, sort of product suite, course suite, mentorship suite. But that is there. Also, if you're in Sydney and keen to learn this stuff in person and feel it with me, 28th of March, second link down below, I'm doing a one-day workshop for the entire movement model and practical ideas and coaching ideas, and more than anything, the sensory exploration drills for you to feel this stuff so you can understand it and then coach it more effectively in your next session. So very keen for both of those things over the next coming weeks. As always, if you followed along with the technical chat, please let me know. Now that we've finished the technical chat, we'll roll into just some life updates. The first one was I was chatting with Angus. Called him, basically call him every week at the moment and just catch up. But he fucking ripped my thumbnails here on YouTube. So if you are new to this channel because of a new thumbnail, thumbs up, like the channel, subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to get this thing off the ground. But he ripped my thumbnails. So I think I'm going to fuck around with making my own thumbnails for a little bit. But I think if I really want to take this business seriously, I think I might have to hire an editor again to help me with very particular things, which maybe I'll chat about in a different thing. But it was funny with Angus. He was like, your thumbnails are fucking shit. And then he just straight away was like, mine aren't any better, but I can tell that he reckons my thumbnails look like a LinkedIn post, which I don't want. So I'm going to try some new thumbnails for the podcast. Obviously, I'm only uploading podcast episodes right now. I've actually decided that unless I take actual channel content seriously, so I'm not just going to fuck around with like mini lectures and all of that sort of stuff. I'd rather just put that time into more short form stuff. Until I'm at the point where I'm ready to attack proper long form content, take it seriously, use an editor, probably find a gym space to record things properly. I need to upgrade my skeletons as well. I want a full skeleton. I want to enter my Connor Harris era and use a skeleton, my Ben Yanez era, and use a full skeleton to describe things. It's actually something I've got to purchase. But until I'm at that point, I don't think I'm going to be making long format content. So I think I'm just going to fuck around with the thumbnails myself for the time being. But it was funny speaking with Angus because I love that feedback that somebody is just like straight up rips it apart. Someone that I respect as well, obviously always helps. But yeah, I don't want my post looking like a fucking LinkedIn post at all. So if my thumbnails ever look like LinkedIn again, please let me know. Full permission to rip me in the comments. In fact, full permission to rip me in the comments all the time. If there's something that I'm doing that you fucking hate, tell me, because there's a good chance if you hate it, other people will hate it as well. So yeah, full permission. Rip me in the comments about whatever it is. Obviously nothing personal. That's never fun, but anything productive, open book. I'm looking for feedback on all this stuff. The other thing that is happening in this office space, so obviously I'm still in the strength culture gym, because I haven't found a tenant yet. If you're looking for a 550 square meter building in the heart of Moorabbin industrial area, great access to Warrigal Road and the Dingley bypass and South Road, reach out, because I have a full fucking shell here and I'm just using it as an office, and I'm still paying rent, which is an exorbitant amount of rent to be paying weekly for just an office space. But since pulling all the furniture out of this podcast room, I've realized that after some research, I thought it was my mic, but this is a fucking proper mic. Like it's a Shure MV7, I believe it is. It's just a USB mic, but I did some research and there's an echo. You probably don't pick up on the echo because I do a shit ton of post audio editing when I'm uploading and doing all of that stuff. But there is a crap ton of reverb in this room, which means from my very entry level understanding, depending on the size of your room and what the surfaces are made of, there would be a reverb. So when you speak, that noise travels, hits the wall, and then eventually travels back. Depending on the frequency, which is dependent on the size of the room, it kind of like elevates and picks up noise. It's called reverb. And obviously, since we pulled the couches out, there was a bunch of other shit that was in here when it was a podcast studio. The reverb is like perfect for the size of the room, is like perfect for like increasing the noise. So it's to the point where like I could be voice memoing on my phone and it sounds like I'm yelling in a tunnel. It's really fucking annoying. I've tried a bunch of different strategies. Obviously, half the walls are in here are heavy curtains, which I thought would be enough. But I think that corner over there, if you're looking on behind that TV, I think that corner is the problem, because noise would be coming off here, hitting that wall and coming back. So I think I need to do something in there to reduce the reverb. So that's another thing that has popped up this week. And part of all of this process is kind of me beginning, because I've kind of been fine just using this as my office and being like, I can get away from home. But I think if I change my belief system around, it's all good that I haven't found a tenant yet, and be like, no, I actually really want to get a tenant because I want to move on. I want to find a gym. I've actually been speaking to World Gym very loosely about renting a space, an office out of their gym, and then being able to use that gym because it's a mad gym. I'm a bit nervous about how busy it could get when I want to film things. And I definitely don't want to piss. So I'm actively now thinking and looking for a gym to move my office to, and start using a gym space to film more content. hopefully be able to take consulting one-on-ones. I'm not going to be taking ongoing one-on-ones, but definitely like consulting one-on-ones, maybe like 3 and 5 packs, to get people to help people and coach people through these ideas. Because I'm obviously coaching a bunch of people online at the moment. A couple of spots still available, always a couple of spots, but definitely a couple of spots still available there for online coaching if you do want to learn this stuff. So yeah, I'm just putting that out to the universe. So if you are somebody that aligns with the universal sort of impact on life, put that out for me. Jamie's going to find a tenant, he's going to move to a gym, and he's going to take his business to the next level in a new space. I'm ready to move on now. I feel like I'm past this first little phase of getting over the nerves, posting content again. The mentorship sold more than I thought it was going to. I'm past that initial sort of feeling where it relates to the business and just my new path and my new career pursuits. So that is something that will be helpful if you could put that out, because the audio is really starting to piss me off. Also, if you own a gym in the Southeast, have an office for space for rent, and would be keen for me to move in, reach out. I'm happy to chat. I'm going to sort of put a little radius around my house, maybe like a 15 minute drive, and mark all the gyms in that space, and probably start looking to see which one might be a good fit and reach out to some people, because I'm keen to move on and I'm keen to really start the next chapter. So yeah, that was all I had for my life update on the podcast. That will be it for today. I'm going to go and edit a new thumbnail and see if I get ripped by Angus again. If you made it to the end, please let me know. Comment down below would be great. If you're here on YouTube, subscribe. I've got to get out of the 300s on subscribers here. And if you enjoyed these topics, help me out, share it around, share it to a friend, a colleague, somebody that might get some value from these topics. That would be great. Final call, mentorship, first link down below. We close on Friday. And if you're in Sydney or want to travel to Sydney on the 28th of March, I'll be there running through this shit in person. So thanks for everything. Thanks for supporting me so far. Thanks for engaging with the content. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next week.